Imagine yourself in a world where Susan Boyle's Britain's Got Talent audition is the most viewed video on YouTube with 120 million views. A place before Miley Cyrus did a little too much partying in the USA. Imagine you're waiting for the latest Halo to come out because the kids on Call of Duty are screeching the N-word because it's faster than just saying they fucked your mom. If you haven't guessed already, this mythical land that I speak of is the year 2009. On March 5th, 2009, Capcom released their 5th entry in the Resident Evil franchise, starring the series' most well-known, well-loved, and well-built character, Christian, built like a brick field. Longtime fans would be disappointed in the title as it would make a sharp turn away from its classic survival horror roots. Let's just say if Resident Evil 1 is The Exorcist, then Resident Evil 5 is Rambo. But honestly, despite Capcom's decision to change its finger-licking good recipe, it was actually pretty good. Hear me out. Getting home from school with my baby boy brother and unwinding some sweet, mindless, action-packed, shoot 'em, boot 'em, da-doom, ba-doom, boom 'em, it was fun to say the least. The same cannot be said about the next entry in the series, also known as Mr. President Evil Super Suckfest Station, the Please Kill Me, I Don't Want to Play This edition. Yeah, it's pretty fucking bad. Okay, so here's what I honestly think happened when Capcom was trying to decide what direction they wanted to take Resi 6. It's 2010, two of Mila Jovovich's spin-off movies are blockbuster big boys, and the Resident Evil CGI spin-off did so well that it would be stupid to think that Resident Evil fans didn't want a more action-oriented experience. Resident Evil 5 got some harsh criticism for going that route, but they still sold $7.3 million. At $60 a disc, that's like at least $1,000. But oh fucking boy did they make the wrong assumption. Their first really big mistake was making this look like this. NANI? But the biggest contributor to Resident Evil 6's negative reception was the utter lack of respect for the roots of their series that define an entire genre. Capcom got so battered by the game's reception that they put the franchise on the back burner for 4 years. In that time period, only 3 Resident Evil games would be released, one being a spin-off sequel, the other being a bundle of 2 earlier games, and the third one being actual dog shit. Things were not looking good for the series at all. Not until this happened.
She's back.
Go tell Aunt Rhody. Go tell Aunt Rhody. Go tell Aunt Rhody that everybody's dead.
With 5 years between Resident Evil 6 and Resident Evil 7, more than enough time had passed for Capcom to take a Kobe Bryant step back buzzer beater shot at redemption. And you know what?
Artest looking, gets it to Bryant. Bryant dribbling, has to put it up with the buzzer. Banks it in! He banks in the three!
They did. I can't tell you how much I love to hate playing Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. It took me 3 years to beat the game, not because it wasn't compelling or because it sucked, but because it was soak your pants in shit scary. No other Resident Evil has come close to putting me in such a dread-inducing atmosphere. Capcom not only did a complete 180 with the direction of Biohazard, but they also demonstrated they listened and learned from the criticisms of their past releases. No longer were you playing as a boulder-punching super soldier or an Evel Knievel, my dad's evil throwaway character. Instead, you get put in the shoes of Ethan Winters, a completely new character to the series at this point. With a switch to a first-person perspective and the addition of characters like Ethan, Evelyn, Mia, and the Bakers, it seemed as if Capcom was doing a reboot of the series, as there were seemingly no signs of anything from the previous Resident Evils, until you actually started playing the game. Like Coca-Cola did in the 80s after switching their recipe, Capcom snapped back to the formula that made the original titles in the series so great. I'm talking about safe rooms and inventory management and puzzles. And where the hell am I supposed to find this dumb fucking shotgun? Fuck. Oh, there it is. Even though Resident Evil 7 was fantastic, it was still missing something. One ingredient that ties the entire formula together.
What is it?
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
I'll be sure to keep you entertained before I dispose of you.
If you think I'm talking about shitty voice acting, then you're dead wrong. Kind of. Okay, not really. Yes, bad voice acting is a part of it, but what I'm getting at is the camp of the original titles. The campiness added some levity to the grim atmosphere of the games and would become an integral part of what makes a Resident Evil game, well, a Resident Evil. So now it's time to answer the question, what makes Resident Evil Village a true Resident Evil? Well, first let me tell you what elements are required to make a Resi worth its salt. First and foremost, you need locations that stand as their own characters. Let's take the Spencer Mansion or Resident Evil 1 for example. You start in the front portion of the mansion. Once you explore a little, you find keys and items that will unlock other areas of the mansion until you eventually find the residence where you can find a key that will unlock even more parts of the mansion. Then you end up in some tunnels, which lead you to the labs where the virus that is absolutely ravaging Raccoon City was created. If you can't tell, the Spencer Mansion plays a huge role in the game, acting as the epicenter and the gatekeeper of all the subsequent locations that Chris and Jill would end up exploring. How it is used in this way gives it depth. I'd even go so far as to say that it's much like an onion.
They stink?
Yes. No.
Oh, they make you cry?
No.
Oh, you leave them out in the sun, they get all brown, start sprouting little white hairs.
No. Layers. Onions have layers.
Resident Evil 8's village is used much in the same way as the Spencer Mansion was. You want to get to Castle Dimitrescu, you gotta find the maiden in Demon Crest. You want to find House Beneviento? Well, first you gotta find a house with a red chimney and look for some wings that you gotta add to this key that you already found earlier. It's this process of progression that can be found in any of the truly great Resident Evils. Not only does the village carry the same quality, but I also want to mention how much of a throwback Castle Dimitrescu was to some of the greatest settings in the Resident Evil franchise. If you're a diehard Resi fan like I am, you can most certainly tell how the castle draws inspiration from the Spencer Mansion, but especially from the palace and private residence in Code Veronica. The next key component to the Resident Evil formula is puzzles. There are many great puzzles in the Resi series, especially in the classics, my favorites being in Code Veronica. Yes, if you can't tell already, it is my favorite entry in the entire series. This puzzle here requires that you push buttons under family portraits in the right order so you can get a key item. Sounds simple enough, but it really shows you how important it is to read the documents, because if you don't, you'd have no idea in what order the Ashford family lineage went, and you want to pick up on which painting showed the Ashford twins' father, because you have to take a tidbit of information that the game gives you and put two and two together. Now Resident Evil Village has puzzles, but they're not nearly as complex as some of the ones found in earlier titles. They don't really get the gears turning all that much, if you know what I mean, because there's a lot of this and not a lot of this. But there is one puzzle in Resident Evil Village that stands out on my mind, and it's this one. It did take me longer than I'd like to admit figuring out the right way to orient the statues, but when I finally did, my brain got a boner. Next on our list of the requirements, if you will, is the Stalker. The Stalker is something that would be introduced in Resident Evil 2 with Mr. X, but later refined in Resident Evil 3 with Nemesis. While the Stalker concept wouldn't be used again until Resident Evil 7 with Jack Baker, I still believe it to be a very signature aspect of the series, albeit not often used. Although Resident Evil 8 would again revisit this concept, it would be entirely too short-lived and not at all as prominent a feature as it was in Resident Evil 2 and 3. I will admit the same can be said about 7, but in my opinion, Jack was such a great stalker type enemy that it would have killed the game for me if he was used as much as Nemesis was in OG 3. Don't get me wrong, Dimitrescu was a fantastic stalker and has earned her right to stand next to her predecessors, but she was just too limited to really be seen as the threat that they were, and by limited, I mean way too easy to avoid and get away from, as well as way too short-lived. What I do want to say though when it comes to Lady D is her boss fight was fucking mwah! Which leads me to our next topic. Boss fights. There are so many good bosses and boss fights in the Resident Evil series, they will require a whole other video dedicated to talking about them. So assuming we're all die-hard Resident Evil fans here, I'll just be talking about some of the ones in Village and how the better ones compare to some of the classics, and how the not so good ones fall short. So to start out, we'll be talking about Lady Double D's. I fucking loved her boss fight. The music was fantastic, the design of her monstrous form was on point, and the setting of the battle was just gorgeous. But, and some of you may disagree with me, but it was kind of too easy.
No, that shit is too easy. Too easy. No. That shit is too easy.
You see, back in the good old days, the difficulty of a boss battle was entirely up to you. And what I mean by that is, if you went around shooting every zombie and zombie dog and zombie fucking lizard thing and popping healing items every time your health went from good to not so good but still fine, well, when you get on that plane and discover your thick boy stowaway and you only have 10 arrows and 1 green herb, well, fuck! Now you gotta start over from the beginning because you're a fucking idiot who's been using only 1 save file. But that's honestly what made me love Code Veronica so much. You actually had to be super conservative with your items, or you very well could put yourself in a position where you had to go back a few saves, or all the way to the beginning as was my case. There just wasn't that same pressure in any of the boss fights in Village. Even in Resident Evil 7 there was that need to conserve your ammo, especially for the Marguerite fight.
Gonna get ya! You scamper your way out of that!
But in 8, it's almost like there's a box of ammo or crafting materials for ammo around every corner. Not to mention every enemy drops lei or items that can be sold for lei, which can then be used to buy even more ammo. That being said, let me touch on a little bit on Donna Beneviento's boss fight. Now, I wouldn't say that there was ever really any fight with her, seeing as all you really gotta do is find her doll a few times and stab the fuck out of it. But the absolute best horror in the game can be found in her terrifying, albeit short segment. Now the Salvatore Moreau boss fight all around kinda sucked. It wasn't the worst in the series by any standard. It just didn't hold up to Dimitrescu or Heisenberg's, and his segment wasn't at all as fun or interesting as Beneviento's. I mean, the puzzles were just goo goo gaga I'm a baby easy, and it's the same for the fight. It's not difficult at all keeping your distance from it, and you don't really have to worry about running out of ammo or anything like that because you have barrels that you can bust open in the area that have it, and you could just lead them to some explosive barrels and make them go boom in his face, which kind of takes the fun out of it, for me at least. My favorite segment and all-around big boy baddie is Heisenberg. I'll go into more detail as to why in the next topic of this video, but for right now I'm just going to talk about his lair, if you will, and his blockbuster epic boss fight.
Like a goddamn cockroach!
So I don't want to make it any kind of secret that I think that the developers of Resident Evil Village drew some heavy inspirations for the game's motif from 2004's Van Helsing. I might make a video about that later, but I mention that comparison right now because it became very evident to me when I got to Heisenberg's factory. And it's one of the reasons it is my favorite segment of the game. I mean, if you look at Frankenstein's monster from the movie and Soldat from the game, you can see the similarities. But I digress. The factory really gives you a look at what kind of character Heisenberg really is, because up to that point, he was really a mystery.
Who's that Pokemon?
Immediately you can tell he's somewhat of a mad scientist, very much like Dr. Frankenstein, with all manners of sick and twisted creations. When you finally do face off with him, you get treated to an epic showdown using the closest thing to a mech suit the series has ever seen. I honestly loved it. It was something kind of new and different, and it was just awesome. So the last thing I want to talk about is something I touched on a little earlier, and that's camp or Resident Evil. Like I said, it was something missing in 7 as Capcom was going for a more pure horror experience, but that's just not what the original Resident Evils were. Yes, they were scary as hell for the most part, but there were moments where the games would make you laugh or even cringe. The over-the-top voice acting or even some of the fantastical story elements of the original games provided some contrast to the horror, and it really balanced everything out and gave the series its signature flavor. I was glad to see that they brought that element of the series back in Village. I mean, when you look at a character like Dimitrescu, you don't typically expect that kind of character as an antagonist, especially with all of the popular horror games today that go for a more typical and expected look for the baddies in their games. Coming back to why Heisenberg is my favorite boss, well, could you really take this fucking guy seriously?
Truth hurts, don't it? Let me guess. You're thinking, take me out like the others, and then he gets going save Rose, right?
I mean, the voice actor for Heisenberg, Neil Newbon, is no scrub. You may recognize him as the face and voice of Elijah Kamsky in Detroit Become Human. So the guy's got chops, meaning it was completely intentional giving Heisenberg that comical accent. Another character that I want to give some credit when it comes to providing contrast for the horror in the game is the Duke.
I've been waiting for you, Mr. Winters.
I fucking love this guy. For an extra big boy, he's got some wit and charm that makes him unforgettable. And what I think people don't realize about this character is that not only is he a callback to the merchant in Resident Evil 4, but he also very much is a personification of the safe room itself. As soon as you see this biggin as you travel in and around the areas of the village, you immediately breathe a sigh of relief. As soon as you see the Duke, you know you're safe. The mere sight of him instills the exact same emotions that you felt when you heard this in Resident Evil 1. Now to actually answer the question, what makes Resident Evil Village a true Resident Evil? It's because of the great locations like the castle and the factory. It's because of characters like Dimitrescu, Heisenberg, and the Duke. It's the looking for key items and solving puzzles and getting your socks scared off. Almost every element in Village drew some inspiration from a title before it, but it also added something new and turned out to be one of the most fantastic titles the series has ever seen. With that, I think I'm finished. So if you made it this far, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again soon in the next one.